For a long time now, I've wanted to design a moss farm because I absolutely love building with moss. This design includes a sorting system that allows you to pick and choose what drops you want to keep. It also has a bone meal mode where it will compost everything produced by the farm. As for the rates, this will produce over 9.5 double chests of moss blocks per hour, if you feed it bone meal from another source. Or for shorter AFK sessions, this will produce over a double chest and a half of moss blocks in just 10 minutes. As well as all of these other goodies, if you want to keep the carpet or the azalea trees or the seeds. Or if you switch it to the bone meal mode, it will produce 2,400 bone meal per hour. All of those rates were for regular moss only. You can use this with pale moss as well. You can split it and have one of each, or you can have two of the same one, 2 regular or 2 pale. It is all totally up to you what you farm. The build area is 17 by 22. All of the iron blocks that you see needs to be solid blocks in this entire 14 by 20 area. But all of the grass that you see could just be air. Now we also have this little stick out section for the item elevator. But you could technically move this anywhere that you want to. You could move it around to the back if you want it more out of the way, simply by digging the water stream under the farm. For this tutorial, we're going to build it in the front off to the right, so it's kind of out of the way, but still simple and easy to build. Aligned with the side of the back section of solid blocks, which is 4 blocks from the left and 1 block from the front, we're going to dig down 1 all the way across. Then at the beginning of this trench, we're going to place in a bucket of water. On the last block of flowing water, we're going to dig down 1 all the way across, so that the water keeps flowing. Then on the last block of flowing water, we're going to replace it with packed ice and a button on top. Then 2 blocks from that, we're going to place another pack ice with a button, and then soul sand for our bubble column. Then we're going to place a bucket of water between the 2 packed ice so that it's flowing toward the soul sand. So if we throw in an item, it should flow all the way across and land on the soul sand at the very end. Then on top of the solid blocks here at the end, 2 blocks from the front and 1 block from the side, we're going to place 7 pistons. So all of these pistons will have a solid block underneath them. Then on the back, we're going to place 14 pistons, 1 block from the back and 4 blocks from the side. So I would recommend using this right here as a guide. Just take a screenshot of this and use that to help you out. But then 1 block in front of the pistons, we want to place regular stone blocks. Now, if you don't have regular stone because you don't have silk touch, you can place whatever block you want to and then break them out later on. We'll go over that when it's relevant. But now we're going to surround all of these pistons and all of this stone and our bottom platform in any kind of solid blocks, going all the way around. So when you're done, you will be left with this. Inside of every single piston, we need to place a bucket of water. We need to flood every single piston. Make sure that you place a bucket of water inside of every single piston. Once we get all of those flooded, we need to place solid blocks on top of the pistons and then on top of the stone. So these 2 rows will be aligned, 1 block apart. And then we want to place a bucket of lava on the center block so that it flows over the water and converts it all to stone. Be sure to aim at the rows of blocks when you place the lava. Don't aim at the water or you'll make obsidian. But just do this on both sides and make sure the lava flows all the way across the water. Then we're going to do the same thing on the back by placing a row of solid blocks on top of the pistons and on top of the stone, but the lava is going to go 4 blocks in from the side. So on the 4th block from each side, place a bucket of lava. So it should flow all the way across the water and totally cover all of the water. And if you want to, you could totally encase the lava in glass or blocks, if you want to. Or you can just leave it open like this to save on some materials and light up the farm at the same time. But now we need two hoppers pointed into each other, aligned with this rightmost lava source, diagonally up from the innermost row of blocks on top of the stone. So the right hopper will be diagonally up from the fourth block from the right that is on top of the stone. Then we want blocks diagonally down from these hoppers, diagonally up from those, and we're just building an etho clock. So we need comparators looking at the hoppers with dust on top of the second block, and then pistons facing toward the hoppers above the comparators. And then finally, a redstone block on top of one of the hoppers. There's our etho clock complete. Now inside of one of these hoppers, we want to place 6 of any item. Doesn't matter what this item is, we just want to place 6 of any item. As soon as you place in those items, the etho clock will start pushing the redstone block back and forth. So we need to place a lever on this rightmost block and turn that lever on to make it stop. Now we need a temporary block right here in this position. So diagonally from that corner block right there, so that we can place a dispenser facing toward the front. And then we're going to place dispensers on this row going all the way across. Make sure that these are in fact dispensers and not droppers. And we need a water bucket inside of every single dispenser. Then place a solid block diagonally from the dispensers to close up the hole, and then place any sort of leaves in front of every single dispenser. Then over here on the back, we're going to place an observer that is looking at this innermost piston. Then we want a block diagonally down from that observer so that we can place dust on top of that block that will be powered from the observer, and then all the way across, down, over, up, and around. So this dust will be run on top of the blocks that are on top of the pistons. That's what this dust will be activating, is all of the pistons. So we're just going to run the dust from that observer all the way across. Now we need a repeater to refresh the signal right here, diagonally from the block that's holding in the lava. And so it's aligned with the etho clock, and we need one repeater on both sides, right there, like so. Now we want to go ahead and turn off the lever to turn on the etho clock. And when you do this, the entire platform will start getting filled up with stone. Now if you used a block other than stone that was in front of your pistons, we'll just go ahead and break out whatever block that was. Right now, just break it all out, because we want this entire platform to be made out of stone. So if you broke out any blocks that you used, just go ahead and turn on the etho clock again, so that it converts this entire platform to stone. Now if you see any cobblestone ever, we need to break the cobblestone. But this shouldn't ever make cobblestone. Like, it might make one here at the very beginning, depending on how you placed in the water and the lava. But if you ever notice it consistently making cobblestone because of world lag, like if you're playing on a super laggy server, we can compensate just by adding items into the etho clock. But even if you think that the world is super duper laggy, just start off with 6 items. 6 items should be more than enough to prevent cobblestone from being made. But if you ever do notice that it consistently makes cobblestone, that's how you can compensate. On the opposite side from the etho clock, we're going to place 2 blocks, 1 block away from that repeater, with 2 repeaters on top. 1 with a max delay, and then 1 with a 3 tick delay. Place dust before those repeaters, and then on top of all of the dispensers, except for the dispensers on the end. Leave those blank. You don't want anything on top of those. We also want the dispensers to start off dispensed. So while the etho clock is turned off, place a temporary button or lever and activate it, so that the water will flood the platform while the etho clock is turned off. So we want that block of redstone to be in this position when the platform is flooded with water. But then place a copper bulb on top of that block, a solid block diagonally down from that, with a comparator looking at the bulb, and an observer looking down at that comparator. Then a solid block on top of that observer, diagonally up from that toward the front. Then place 2 blocks right here, and then 6 more blocks on this side, for a total of 8 blocks that is centered with all of this. So there will be 3 dispensers from the ends of this ledge, if it's all aligned correctly. But then go forward by 3 blocks on each side, and then place a slab toward the middle next to each of these end blocks. Then we want a solid block diagonally up from each slab toward the center, with redstone torches on the sides of these blocks. So those torches will be touching. Now we want redstone dust on top of all of these blocks and the slabs, all the way around, so this is what you will have. Now we need the bone mealing section, which can be a little awkward to build. So what I would recommend is jump down right here and place 3 temporary blocks going up, so that we can look up and place 2 droppers pointed down, starting next to that slab, and then a dispenser facing away from the center, and a sticky piston up at the top, diagonally up from the droppers. So 2 droppers into a dispenser with a sticky piston diagonally up from that. And we want that sticky piston to be holding an observer that is looking away, and then a moss block in front of the dispenser. So this is what we have. You'll have to pillar up a little bit to place these things, especially the observer can be a little awkward and the piston. But either way, we want 2 droppers facing down, starting next to that slab, then a dispenser facing away into a moss, and then a sticky piston next to that dust up at the top, holding an observer that is facing away. The moss block can be regular moss or pale, but we'll talk about that later on, because there is a slight difference. But now we want to place 2 hoppers pointed into each of the 2 top droppers, so that these 4 hoppers are pointed away from each other. Then in the middle, we want to place hoppers facing down and a double chest on top. So the hoppers pointed down are right next to the torches. Now inside of this chest, we're going to place some bone meal. The farm will fuel itself, but you need to place in a tiny bit of bone meal to get it started. Even just like tin would be totally fine. The farm will automatically compost stuff to fill up its bone meal reserves. But the first time that you turn it on, it's not going to activate the first few rounds, because I wanted this to have perfect bone meal distribution, where we don't have bone meal left idle in the dispensers or the droppers, and where each dispenser receives the exact same number of bone meal. So every activation, it will only allow 2 bone meal to go into the droppers. But technically, this could be done. You can just load in bone meal in the topmost chest and pick up your drops by hand, or make your own custom collection system. One last thing that we do need to do is build a wall around the water part, so that the moss and the seeds and the plants don't hop up and land on the edge of the farm. So just go up by 1 additional block around the edges, and up by 3 blocks here in the front. Before we build the collection system, there is something important to know when it comes to building stuff around this farm. We don't want to build anything above the water that is below where these observers are. If there isn't enough air above the stone, it won't turn into moss. Like here we see there are these 2 holes in the middle of the moss, and it's because this floating moss and dispenser are too close to the stone to actually spread moss to those 2 locations. The stone needs 6 blocks of air above it in order to actually spread moss to that location. So don't build anything below where the observers and hoppers are. Now it's time to build the collection, storage, and composter. Before settling on this design, I tried out a ton of different storage systems. Different locations, different styles, different features. I was hoping to figure out a simple type of storage system that could be shared if we built multiples of these farms above or next to each other. But the problem with that is it just produces too many items. So we would essentially have to use quad speed filters, which are kind of complicated and expensive. So I settled on this one that I think is the best of all worlds. Here we have a Bonemeal mode lever that will compost all of the drops into bone meal, if that's what you're looking to get. We have a crafter that will turn the bone meal into bone blocks for compact storage. And then we have 7 filters for us to take out the drops that we want. So if we want the flowering azaleas, or the carpet, or if we just want the moss blocks. Regardless of what items you want it to keep, it will try to keep as many of those items as it can. But if it ever starts running low on bone meal, it will automatically start composting extra things so that it can refuel itself. Starting off, we're going to place a hopper pointed into the left side of that chest, with a crafter on top facing into a second chest. Make sure the crafter's face is pressed up against that chest. Oh, but also we need to build somewhere to stand, so we can place solid blocks or slabs next to the hopper directly under that chest. Again, just remember that you don't want to build anything below where the observers are. You can build stuff on the same Y level as those observers. Just don't go below that line, or it won't grow any moss. But go ahead and build a little platform with a staircase or a ladder or something so that you can get up here, and we're going to start building the rest of it. We're going to place 5 solid blocks starting next to the crafter in this pattern. We need a comparator looking at the crafter through that block, with another comparator pointed into the side of that one, looking at a second crafter that has all 9 slots locked, so that it's comparing a strength of 9 with the first comparator. But then place a solid block above it, and 3 dust looping back around. That's our crafter for our bones. But now we need a hopper pointed into the back of that crafter, then 2 hoppers pointed into the first one behind that chest, then 6 more hoppers over on this side. Make sure they're all pointed toward that first one. Then we want a composter on top of every hopper for a total of 9, and then a hopper pointed down into each composter. You kind of have to aim at the edge of the composter to get those top hoppers placed. Now we want a piston behind this chest above the torch that's closest to the crafter. And if you don't want this piston to just like open and close randomly, place a block of obsidian on top of that block before you place the piston. Then kind of place the piston where it's holding that block of obsidian. The reason we need this random piston is we need to read how much bone meal is in that chest using a comparator, but we don't want the hopper above where that piston is to be locked. That torch is powering the piston, and if it were a block, that would in turn lock that hopper. But the piston is not a solid block, so it doesn't lock the hopper, but we can still see through it using a comparator. But now we need 2 solid blocks next to that, a repeater pointed into the side of that comparator. Oh, and make sure that comparator is on subtraction mode. Make sure that little light is turned on. But then place a second repeater, then dust to connect those together. Next to the bottom chest and repeater, we want to place either a solid block or a lamp with a lever on it. When that lever is turned on, the farm will only produce bone meal. The lamp is just a visual indicator and could be replaced with any solid block. But now we want 7 sideways chests going away from the lever. So 7 chests going away. And we want these to be 3 chests high. This is our storage system for our moss blocks and other goodies. We're going to have 7 filters that we can program in any way that we want. But first, we need hoppers pointed into the back of all of these chests. Behind all of the topmost hoppers, we want to place a row of solid blocks. Then we want 2 more rows diagonally above and below this first one. So a total of 3 rows of solid blocks aligned with the hoppers. Then we want a 4th row diagonally down from this. So each of these rows are 7 blocks long. Now on these bottom 2 rows here on the back, we want repeaters facing forward on top of all of those blocks. And then we want torches on the sides of these blocks right here, where these torches are touching the hoppers in front of them, like so. Now we want to go out by another row of blocks behind where these repeaters are and place dust on top of these blocks. Then above that dust, we want another row of solid blocks. And on the front side of all of these blocks, we want to place torches. So these torches will power the topmost repeaters. Then above those torches, we want a row of glass. We want to place redstone dust on top of these back 3 rows, like so. Then on top of this front row, we want to place comparators that are pointed toward the back. Then we want hoppers that are pointed toward these comparators. And if it's awkward to aim at the comparator to place the hoppers, we can replace where the comparators are with temporary blocks, and then have the hoppers pointed into those blocks, and then place the comparators. These are our filter hoppers, so we just don't want them pointing into any container. Having them pointed at a comparator doesn't actually mean anything. It's just a safe way to make sure that everything is correct. Now over on this side, we're going to place a block coming out of that comparator that's on subtraction mode, then going over and connect it over here. Then we're going to place a repeater right there in the middle, facing toward our filters, and then 4 dust, connecting that together. Between these 2 rows of hoppers, we want to place a pack ice with a button on top, any button, it doesn't matter. Then place another pack ice with a button over here on this side. Then we're going to surround all of these hoppers and ice in either glass or solid blocks. I like using glass just so that I can see the items going through, to make sure that everything is working correctly. But if you don't want to use glass, you don't have to. You can just use solid blocks. Then place a bucket of water next to that button, and another bucket of water next to that button. And it should flow basically all the way to the end. There should be 1 hopper that doesn't have water above it. And that is our storage system complete. Now we just need to build the bubble elevator. So back over here with this soul sand that we placed at the very beginning, we just need to build a bubble elevator. So place a second button right there so that the 2 buttons are right above each other. And then just build a tube out of glass or blocks going all the way up. Again, I like using glass so I can see the items and make sure everything is working correctly. But if you don't want to use glass, you can use any block that you want. But go over by 2 blocks from that pack ice, and this should align perfectly to where your bubble elevator is. Then just surround this diagonally up in your blocks or glass to make a canal, like so. Now we need a roof above the bubble elevator, but I like making this hole 2 blocks tall, so that if you go up it at some point, you can get out without having to, swim or something. But now we just need to fill the bubble elevator with water. So you could use the kelp method if you want to, or just place water buckets going all the way up. Just make sure that all of these are bubbles. And then place a final bucket of water here at the top, 1 block above the bubble elevator, so that the water flows over to that button, like so. Now all that's left is to program our filters. So all of these hoppers that are pointed into the comparators are our filter hoppers. So inside of each of these, we want to place a single item in the last 4 slots that's stacked to 64 and that will never be in the farm. So these could be a named item, like you could name seeds on an anvil, or you could just use sticks or dirt or cobblestone. But in the first slot, we want to place the item that we want to keep. I would recommend the leftmost filters be for moss blocks. And if you want to maximize the number of blocks that you will receive, I would have 3 to 4 hoppers just for moss blocks. So 3 or 4 hoppers just for the moss blocks. And same way with the pale. If you're farming pale moss, you want to have like 3 filters just for the blocks. Moss just produces more blocks than all the other items. So it needs more filters to actually pull out all of those blocks as they pass by. But it also depends on what you think is important. Like if you really want the carpet, if that's what you're trying to farm, you can make more filters specifically for the carpet. Have 2 or 3 of them. And then anything that you don't filter for will just automatically get composted and recycled back into the farm's bone meal supply. So like, I highly doubt we would ever need to filter for seeds. We can just let those get composted. Now, if one of these items is super important, like you really, really want the flowering azaleas, you can break that torch right there on the flowering azalea filter. Now, no matter what happens, no matter how low the farm gets in bone meal, it will still keep the flowering azaleas. So if you do this too many times, if you break too many of these torches, the farm won't actually be able to produce enough bone meal for itself. So never break out more than 1 or 2 of those torches, and only do it if that item is just really, really, really important. For any moss farm, to produce enough bone meal on its own to keep it going, will require it to compost some of the items that you want to keep. Especially if you're trying to farm pale moss. Pale moss produces way less items than regular moss does. Basically, every time you bone meal a regular moss, it gives you like 2.3 bone meal back. But pale moss is way lower than that. So if you want both sides to be producing pale moss, you will want to add bone meal from somewhere else into this farm. Because if you don't, it's going to spend a majority of its time just refueling itself, composting all of the pale moss blocks back into bone meal to keep it stocked. So if you don't want to add bone meal from somewhere else, having one side be regular moss and the other side be pale will actually give you more pale moss in the long run, because the regular moss gives you more bone meal. So you could even break out these torches on the pale moss filters, so that it almost never composts pale moss. You could also just change what the filters are looking for, and just have them all be pale moss. That way all of the regular moss just automatically gets composted, and none of it gets kept. Having one side be regular moss will fuel the entire farm enough to make it efficient, without you having to add in extra bone meal. If this chest ever drops below 4 stacks of bone meal, it will lock all of the filters and compost 100% of the items until it gets 4 stacks again. Like if we take out a stack of bone meal, all that redstone over there on the left turned off, which means that the filters are no longer accepting items. So all of the items will get composted until there are 4 stacks of bone meal again. For regular moss, about 40% of the total items produced will need to get composted in order for it to fuel itself. And we can also turn on this lever to force lock all of the filters. So if this lever is turned on, every item being produced by the farm is going to be composted down into bone meal. And then the crafter will automatically start crafting bone blocks if your bone meal chest gets full. But if you're using this just to produce bone meal, then there's no point in using pale moss. Pale moss produces way less bone meal than regular moss. So for bone meal mode, we want both sides to be regular moss for maximum bone meal production. Once this chest and hopper are totally full of bone meal, the meal will start backing up into the crafter, which will then craft it into bone blocks to condense your storage. But one thing we can actually do to make the bone meal production a little more efficient is above these first 2 composters, we can place in 4 non-compostable items. So like 4 sticks or 4 stone into 4 of the slots. This will just help spread the items out more, where you have more composters active at any given time, which will just speed up the time that it takes to produce the initial bone meal. So only do this to the first 2 composters. Don't do it to any of the other ones, because it won't really matter, and it could lead to overflow. But as bone meal builds up inside of the crafter, it will automatically condense those down into bone blocks. Now be aware that this crafter is not overflow protected, but it would take over 12 hours to fill up this double chest full of bone blocks, so you should be okay. Because there's this really big misconception that moss farms actually make good bone meal farms. Where like if you look at the rates, even a moss farm that's optimized for bone meal production doesn't come anywhere close to even a basic mob farm. There are tons of farms that produce more bone meal and that are easier to build. Like the best one you can build right now is just a trident killing fish farm that can produce up to 42,000 bone meal per hour. The biggest benefits to moss farms is that you can essentially build an infinite number of them within simulation distance, that they can be built anywhere, and that they produce moss, but can also produce bone meal if you need it. The last thing to mention is if we want to move where the on-off lever is. That is super duper easy. We can move that lever anywhere that we want to, because all we need to do is activate that dust right there. So let's say we want to move the lever up here next to our storage. We could have it there, or we could have it one block up, just for aesthetics. The only thing that we need to keep in mind is we don't want that lever to activate any of the other redstone, or to lock any hoppers. But where it is right now won't do any of that. The dust won't be pointed at those hoppers aren't next to any of these blocks, so it's all totally fine. We could just work our way down. But also, again, we don't want to build anything below where those observers are, above the moss platform, above where the water is. But this isn't above the water, it's off to the side, so it doesn't matter. We can just go down all the way and then just loop this over to the etho clock and just run the dust from where the lever is now over to the dust on this etho clock right here. If we ran the lever farther away, we could add repeaters in there to refresh the signal. As long as your lever toggles that dust on the etho clock, it is all good to go. Now, one last thing to keep in mind is that you always want to turn this off before you leave. If it is unloaded while it is running, depending on where the chunk borders are, it could generate cobblestone. But if it ever generates cobblestone, you need to go in there and break the cobblestone by hand, because you want the platform to be totally stone. So just turn this off before you leave. Now, even though I said that moss farms don't make good bone meal farms, that's only true on a small scale. Like a single moss farm, compared to most farms that produce meal, gets blown out of the water. The thing is that you could build as many moss farms within simulation distance as you want to, from bedrock to build limit, and they would all be active. So you could get, 200,000 bone meal per hour if you built enough moss farms in that area. Whereas other farms are limited to spawning distance, not simulation distance. So just something to keep in mind. It all depends on how much work you want to put in. But that's all we got for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, share, and subscribe. Always remember that you are totally awesome, but above all, don't forget to have fun. Bye-bye.